Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Experience Beyond podcast. In today's episode, we are unpacking a critical challenge that plagues most of the data driven organization. Why having insights isn't enough, and how companies are still falling into this trap of turning customer data into meaningful change. The episode is titled Death by Data. How companies fail at turning customer insights into change. I'm Anand Nigam, your host, co-founder and director at XEBO.ai, where we are obsessed in helping organizations transform insights into action using the power of AI. To explore this topic, I'm very excited to welcome Justin Robbins to the show. Justin is the founder and principal analyst at Metric Sherpa, a research and advisory firm on a mission to cut through the noise and help businesses and technology leaders drive measurable impact in customer interactions. With more than 15 years of experience at the intersection of CX strategy, contact center operations, and SaaS go-to-market execution, Justin brings unmatched clarity on how to align data with operational reality. From leading global thought leadership efforts at 8x8 and UJET, to shaping industry standards at ICMI, HDI, and CX Accelerator, Justin has helped brands like Salesforce, Oracle, and NICE reimagine customer experience through strategic storytelling, training, and execution. He is a keynote speaker, qualitative researcher, and a CX coach as part of the QATC board advisors. He continues to mentor professionals on how to elevate quality and training programs that actually move the needle. If you have ever asked yourself, we have the data, so why we are not improving, then you are in the right place. Justin is going to help us dissect this data to action gap and uncover what is really takes to operationalize insights, inspire teams, and deliver results that customers feel. So let's sit back, ready to think our approach to CX transformation with Justin. Justin, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Anand. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here with you today.
So Justin, you have spent years decoding customer experiences for organizations worldwide. Can you share what sparked your passion for customer experience, and was there a defining moment or story in your life that set you on this CX journey?
This is a fun question. I want to talk about the spark, and then I want to talk about the thing that fanned it into flames. The spark for me was at 12 years old, and at 12 years old, I had a paper route. And one of the things I learned while doing that paper route, so every morning you got this printout with every house that you'd be delivering to, and there may be requests. I'm going to be on vacation, so hold my papers. Or I'd really prefer my paper to be delivered between these two doors on my back porch, right? A number of things like that. And what I learned there is by paying attention to those small requests, they could have an outsized impact. That if I learned that this paper really didn't like the newspaper to be rolled, even though that was easier for me to carry and for me to throw it onto the porch, but if I laid it nicely or I folded it in thirds and put it on their porch, it had an impact on their experience. And when they were having a great experience from me as a paper carrier who was hoping for tips at the end of the week or on the holidays, I found that the houses that I paid attention to the small requests, there was reward and there was recognition for doing that. Coincidentally, that was also my first time in a contact center. We received an invitation to earn even more money by going in and in the evening making phone calls and interrupting dinner times, asking people to buy newspaper subscriptions. That maybe didn't spark my passion, but it was certainly one of my first things. So early on, I learned about understanding customer preference and the impact that it can have when we acknowledge those. That was maybe the spark. For me, what really fanned the idea of making this my forever work was when I spent time at Hershey Entertainment and Resorts. And for me, the defining moment was really working for a brand that had a very clear purpose, a very succinct definition of how every employee played a role in serving the customer experience, and for it became personal. I think that was the biggest thing. It became personal, and it wasn't about a job. It was about a connection that I had, and a way that I saw my own skills and passions and giftings being fulfilled in helping others. That for me was really the turning point to say, yeah, this is what I want to do for the rest of my career.
Oh, awesome, Spark. And what a story for you to get connected to this CX community. And I'm sure CX community has benefited a lot. And now coming back to our topic, which is death by data. So we know, Justin, that businesses today, they are collecting a lot of data, huge amount of data. Never imaginable. You name a point and they are trying to collect data from there. But often they struggle to convert these information, all the quantity of data that they are collecting, into insights and then further into meaningful actions. So what do you think are the biggest challenge or reasons companies get stuck in this data trap?
And I think one of the first things that comes to mind for me is I see a lot of organizations that confuse dashboards with decisions. They put a ton of information out, but then when you ask somebody, it's like, okay, what's most important right now? What has to win in this moment? People freeze up. And when I look at what are they reporting on, what are they talking about, they're using data as a report card. It's completely reflective. It's about, hey, this is what happened in the past, not at all positioning it as a roadmap. And this to me plays out time and time and time again. I ask organizations, like, talk to me about what matters most to you. What are the data points that you're measuring on, that you talk about? And almost everything is reflective. And I asked them, well, what are you doing from a predictive standpoint? Are you defining and measuring predictive behaviors? If we do this, we believe we will get to this outcome. And organizations aren't thinking strategically there. So to me, this first big bucket that I'll say is, because we're making the information visible, we're operating under the assumption that it's doing something, it's driving decisions, and in most cases, it's just driving reflex. Right, we're reacting to what's happening, and we're not being strategic about it. I think that's part one for me. The second bit that I see that I think gets organizations stuck in this data trap is that there's a incredible fear of being wrong, and if I'm wrong, then I don't know what'll happen, but I'm just not going to do it. And then, so therefore I don't see teams experiment. I see teams involve too many decision makers, and then it just comes to a screeching halt. They're not able to move fast. And so much is changing right now on all sides of the equation. And I think if leaders own a sense of empowerment to look at the data that's in front of them and do something about it, right? Part of this is, it goes back to decisioning, but really it's more about the fear side of it. Like, have some confidence, be willing to talk about what you're thinking and what your smart bets that you want to make as an organization, I think is part two. I think the bigger part for me is not involving enough of the right people. So maybe we involve too many people in the wrong ways, but if I'm in marketing and Anand's in product and someone else is in another part, how do I make sure that we're having conversations about how each one of our sets of data align with what we're trying to move to together? So are we aligned, right? Am I confident in making experiments and doing something, right? And are we kind of moving past the disillusion of a dashboard is not a decision?
Right. In fact, I was recently speaking to a client who is in the banking sector in this region. And what surprised me was that because he's got so many stakeholders that he needs to please, and he was heading the CX in the bank, he had so many stakeholders that he had to please. He requested for a lot of information to be collected. Be it through surveys, be it through social listening, be it through ticketing and internal information and all that. And what he did was, instead of customizing the information which is relevant for each stakeholder, he provided all the access to all the stakeholders. Now, imagine if you are a credit card manager and if you are getting information related to branch experiences and your personal finance experiences and mortgage experience along with the credit card experiences, you are actually lost. I mean, you are, instead of focusing only on credit card data, you are lost. So I know that organizations today, they have access to a lot of information. But then when it comes to decision making, I think you need to have that laser focus on which information you need to focus on at that given point of time or the problem at hand. Now, that's where most organizations, like you rightly pointed out, they actually fail to identify where exactly they can focus on so that the information not only becomes relevant, insightful, and practical for that initiative, that specific initiative or that specific stakeholder.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things I mentioned to organizations sometimes, Anand, is the difference between understanding the direction your team is moving in and understanding the destination your team is moving toward. And here's what I mean by that. If I were to say, so if you and I were together right now in North Carolina, where I'm at, and I had to say, hey, the destination our team is moving is west, you might end up in Seattle and I might end up in San Francisco. Right? Because that directional is not enough. And we'd say this as organizations, right? It's like, hey, what we want to do is we want to provide a great customer experience and we give directional guidance. We don't give guidance towards the destination. Say, this is what that actually looks like. This is how you know where you're moving, because then you know what are the right sets of metrics and measures and decision points that I need to be looking at to figure out, hey, are we moving in the right direction? Did we make any missteps?
Absolutely. Something else that I've come across which poses a big problem or challenge when it comes to using the insight successfully in coming up with action. It's like many organizations, they have got internal barriers like, department silos, very conflicting priorities, and sometimes even the organizational culture that blocks CX insights from translating into a change. So how have you seen successful organizations tackle these internal barriers?
Yeah, I think the first thing is important to identify the barrier that you're up against. There's actually three. There's institutional, there's situational, and there's dispositional. The institutional ones are kind of some of the things that you mentioned in terms of like organizational challenges, hey, we just don't do it that way here, or hey, the priorities from the board or the executive team having us move in a different direction, right? Is that the case? Situational might be, I don't actually have access to that particular system, or I haven't been given the training I need to appropriately interpret and act on this data. And dispositional just might be somebody who's like, I don't care what the data says, I don't believe you, I don't trust it, I don't want to hear it. Right? Very broad, but the first bit is understand which of the three barriers are you up against. To me, it doesn't matter which one of those are. I think the first place really begins in, do you clearly understand what you are trying to do or say or drive with the data? And then more importantly, do you understand the perspective of the other party? And so if it's an organizational thing, what is it that the executive you might have to sell this to? What is it that they might be hearing, seeing, thinking, believing, perceiving that would be against the case you're trying to drive, right? And once we understand what's actually driving that barrier, we need to posture our business case. We have to posture our approach. We have to posture our evidence from a point of actually understanding why that barrier exists in the first place. That, I think, Anand, shortly said, is what holds us back is our ignorance to why that barrier exists. And if we understand why that barrier exists, then really all our job is to do something about it. Like, I mean, it really is as simple as that. It's like, once you understand why it's there, ask some questions, get some people involved to say, okay, here's the challenge we're up against. What might it look like for us to go after this together?
Very interesting. Yeah. So the best way to overcome the barriers would be first identify what is the reason behind those barriers. and like rightly identified, you put across the three key areas, which could be institutional, or it could be situational, or it could be dispositional, and every of such classification will have a different kind of response for you to overcome that barrier.
What doesn't work is change by force, right? Inflicting whatever CX action you're trying to realize on other teams or on individuals doesn't work. One of the best ways, again, understand where they're coming from and then invite them in. One of the coolest things I saw was an organization I was part of. We selected one or two stakeholders from every function to be part of, in other terms, a CX task force, right? It's really saying, how do we look together at the barriers that maybe we're facing in our own departments or we're facing in our work with other departments, and how do we come together to solve them? That was another really meaningful approach.
Nice. Thanks, Justin. One more area, we often come across organizations, they're collecting a lot of data. You spoke about it when we talked about the first point, where organizations are collecting information. So they are collecting a lot of data and insights. However, they are not able to come up with effective approaches to move from insights into measurable business impacts. Right? Could you share some specific examples of framework that clearly illustrates this, how organizations are able to focus on measurable business impact?
Yeah. The first bit is get really uncomfortable because a lot of what I see teams doing today with some of their insights is their insights pertinent only to their team. I had one executive recently, Anand, who told me that a particular department, he'd been conditioned to ignore anything that they share because it didn't connect to the business of the business. That, I think, is the very first step. If you want to have an approach that effectively turns insights into action that drive business impact, you need to understand what business impact actually looks like. It's not just customer satisfaction. It's not just NPS. How are you getting into revenue or churn or risk reduction, right? Really getting into actual business impact is the first bit there. The second, then, to me, is almost treating insights and the data that we're collecting in the same way that we would act if we were developing a product or developing a service. And it goes to some of the things we talked about earlier is, hey, what is the purpose of this? What do the outcomes look like? And what's the timeline or the approach to get there? One of the best examples of an organization I worked with had a framework that was really simple, and it was listen, learn, launch. Step one, listen, was all about what are the different ways that they gather insights on a daily, weekly, monthly basis and beyond, right? That was the first part. They defined it. It's like, hey, this type of channel this is how we look for insights from our employees. This is how we look at insights from our customers who are really, really mad at us. This is right. They defined how they listen. Then the second phase, which again played out every day, was learn. And they were looking at things like, what is the severity of the insight that we're gathering? What's the frequency of the insight? What's the impact, not just of the thing that we heard, but the impact if addressed? This so often is a spot where I see teams, they're like, that's just one person. And they don't take a step back to say, but what if it's not? And more importantly, like, what would be the outsized impact of addressing this so no one ever has to have this issue again, right? So they had this method of looking at severity, frequency, impact, and some other things. And then the last bit, launch, which I loved because they weren't afraid to take risks, is they would launch, I'm going to call it a micro action within 48 to 72 hours. Right? These were small iterative things that they could do without having to involve significant process or team. It's empowering someone to say, let's try this and see what happens. And then what were the results? What happened? What did we expect to happen? What was the difference? And then they had a feedback loop to say, okay, now this is something we can try or not. That to me was awesome, because what I saw with them and what I see with so many organizations is there are a million actions that we don't take because we believe they're too small. And yet so often those small millions of actions build customer trust in incredible ways. So I think that's an important piece. And the last thing that I mentioned in terms of like driving impact is having accountability built in, making sure that we've got owners assigned, that deadlines are tracked, that results are shared, right? If you're going to take that approach, you have to have people that you're able to hold accountable as well.
Nice. So I really like this 3L approach. I mean, is it something that you have seen somewhere or you have actually practiced it? It will be great to share some of these examples. Which companies have you come across who are actually practicing it?
Yeah, so there was one organization in particular that is where I saw that. And then there's others since then where, when we've talked about this process, I was like, hey, here's one thing, right? It worked for this one, see if it works for you. And I've seen other organizations take variations of it, but really it's about, do you have a mechanism for intentionally capturing customer insights, right? That is an intentional capture. Do you have a way to figure out what those insights are telling you, what they mean, and what's worth taking action? And then do you have a process for taking action? That's really it. And in that case, I've seen lots of organizations who do that, but can you make it simple? Can you make it systematic?
Awesome. I love the 3L approach that you just shared. It's a great framework. I'm sure our audience would love to explore and implement within their organization. Beyond framework, Justin, we are living in a world which is transforming with technology. Every day there is something or the other happening, and it's happening for the good. Technology has been a great enabler. So even in CX, technology promises a lot in the CX transformation. But companies, they still struggle with execution part, which could be part of your launch in the previous framework. So in your view, what's the right balance between relying on technology and ensuring that the human element isn't lost in interpretation of customer feedback?
So if we go to the topic of death by data, information overload, analysis paralysis, right? However you want to talk about it, historically, the problem has always been so much it just becomes noise. That's the premise here, right?
Correct.
What to me is one of the wonderful things that's happening as we look at the technology human intersection is that with the right prompting and deployments and intentional approach to engineering how we're thinking about technology, it's enabling us to better surface signals, right? So we've got a lot of noise. How do we figure out what's most meaningful and then can be directional guidance? Because people, like our role continues and will continue to be really decoding the story that comes out of that. And I'll talk a little bit more about what I mean about that. But if I look at part of my background is in quality and training. And, that's a space right now where there's lots of things where there's all sorts of insight that's being automated, where technology is pulling in and doing really great things to help people understand what's happening. Technology is not asking why and so what, right? This is one of the places where I think it's interesting to say, okay, how do we get technology to tell us what's happening? And then how do we make sure we've got the right people in the right place to say, well, why is this happening? And so what does this mean for us? I think technology continues to help us think and act with greater speed. And as we're able to do that, where do we bring, humans in interpreting it? Well, how do we think about applying empathy to those decisions? How do we think about the impact that it's actually going to have on people? Again, that's not going to just be done by technology. Really, Anand, for me, what it comes down to, the orgs that I think are doing this the best is they're taking technology to accelerate in all the places where we think it would make sense to accelerate our decision making. They're using technology in all the right places to surface signals where we are struggling to find them today. And then really where they're thinking about how do we apply humans are coming in to help the organization now prioritize where they should be taking decision, to contextualize what that data might actually mean in the broader context of all the other things that happen on a daily basis. And more importantly, then they really help the business act.
No, absolutely. In fact, many of these technology implementation, they are more or less supporting the human element in executing it. So you could get you a lot of information about the customer who a agent might be interacting with, but then giving him the right information at that given point of time, which you said real-time information, processing faster information, and providing him those inputs when he's executing the task with empathy for the customer. That's the biggest win, I would believe, if technology and human can coexist and work together. What do you think in terms of when we look forward, look ahead, what's the major shift that business need to make now to avoid the topic of death by data and actually genuinely transform customer feedback into sustainable business improvements?
I could go on this one for a really long time.
So mention two, not one. Let's go two.
All right, here's my two. The first one is, and I'm gonna say, because we're talking about customer data, we really have to be thinking about customer experience as an outcome, not a department. One of the biggest challenges right now, Anand, is if we think about some of the different customer insight data that we get today, we're like, oh, it's that team that does that, or that sits inside of that function. And really, our customer interactions happen across every facet of our organization. And if we don't think about it in that context, we're gonna continue to fall into organizations collecting their own silo of data, using it for their own purposes, and you're gonna have a bunch of conflicting insights. You're gonna have a bunch of, like, it's all over the place. And to your point, you're like, hey, one department wanted to do this, and so they gave everybody access to everything. Not like that's not taking it from a global approach, right? What we have to say is like, hey, here's the end-to-end customer interaction. So we have all of the data in that way, but then in this department, we know that they need to have access to these three things because this is going to be most helpful in that. So that to me is part one. Maybe the second most actionable part today is we have to make this shift from being passive listeners, which I think is where a lot of us today on the data that we have, like, we're just waiting to see what it tells us, and then we do something about it, rather than trying to be people who operate proactively, and maybe it's proactive sense making is what I'm thinking here, is like, how are we going to the data with a clear vision of what we're trying to understand and what we're trying to do, and then say, what's the right set of data that I need to make that happen, rather than wait for the data to come to me and see what I can figure out.
So, which is the framework that you mentioned just a few minutes back, the listen, learn, and launch. So you look at the data, you try to identify what it is saying, and then you come up with what can be done with it, which could be related to product, service, or anything else, right?
You have to start there, and I'm gonna, if I think about this in a crawl, walk, run phrase, like, you have to start with an approach that starts to give you some better context on what might this data be telling us. But you also, as you move like down kind of in your career journey, but also as an organization, as you become more mature in doing this as a practice, you should be having ways to proactively be thinking about, hey, what do we need to learn, address, and action, as we go into the coming.
So now I think that brings us to the end of the first section that we had in our podcast, Justin. Are we ready to start the round 2, which is the rapid fire round? All set. So anyway, first question, I feel it becomes redundant now because I've seen you sipping coffee. So are you a coffee person or tea person?
I'm a coffee person.
Absolutely. So that's a proof. You don't require a answer now. You can just show the proof. This is what
Yeah.
you are.
But CX and coffee, the two always have to go together.
They always go together. What is the one word that describes you at work?
Ooh. I'm going to go with intentional.
Intentional or
I
tensional?
think so. Intentional.
No. Intentional. Nice. One word that comes to your mind when you hear customer feedback.
We've just spent time talking about this. Noise was the first word that comes to mind. It should be helpful, but I think too often it's noise, Anand.
Very good. I think it was to the point. I think related to the topic, noise, a lot of data. The CX myth you feel that should disappear. Everyone, there is a myth about CX which you feel should go away. For example, I believe one of the biggest myth in CX is that CX is cost.
Ooh. My biggest myth is that CX is a department.
Very good one. Awesome. Liked it. It's not just one department, it's the entire organization. Yep.
Yeah,
Agreed.
it's an outcome. It's an outcome. That's, yeah.
Finally, last one. What's one customer experience trend that actually excites you right now?
I love what is happening with personalization and the potential for it to get even greater. I'm very much one that I will give you access to data and insight about me if I understand how you're using it in a way that benefits me. And I think incredible things can happen if we continue to lean into the personalization trend.
Personalization, way to go. Thank you, Justin. What a fantastic deep dive with you. Awesome. From myth of being a data driven to identifying real world gaps in CX execution. Justin, you reminded us that insights without action is just noise. The word noise, you talked about it. Big thank you, Justin, for bringing clarity and energy to such a critical topic. I think our audience would definitely love to learn a lot. And I'm sure they can go to your website, which is metricsherpa.com, for more practical research-driven CX insights. So I'm happy to direct them to that website of yours. To my audience, if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow, subscribe, and leave a quick review. It helps more CX leaders find us. Until next time, I'm Anand Nigam. Thank you for turning into Experience Beyond podcast. See you soon. Bye-bye.